Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. This is Jeff Rumberg. I'm a managing partner with METRICNET, and I'll be your presenter for today's webcast on staffing ratios for IT service and support. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for participating in our webcast today. And I want to thank BrightTalk for inviting METRICNET to speak on this topic. Before we get started, I have just a few administrative announcements to make. During today's webcast, all of you will be in listen-only mode. But if you have any questions during the webcast, you will notice a questions button just below the image of my slides. During the webcast, you can click that button and type in your questions as the webcast progresses. I'll wrap up my presentation a few minutes early to answer any questions that you've typed in during the webcast. Now, just by way of quick introduction, METRICNET'S core business is metrics and benchmarking. We conduct service desk, desktop support, and contact center benchmarks in virtually every industry and vertical market. And we now have the largest database of process and performance indicators in the industry. Now you can download today's presentation along with several associated attachments by clicking on the attachments button. We have 3 polls in our webcast today, and when those polls come up, we'll ask you to vote on those. And of course, we'd like you to rate our webcast and leave us any feedback that you would like when you exit the webcast today. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. What I'm showing here is kind of the 30,000-foot view of why right sizing is important. This is true whether you have a service desk, a desktop support organization, or a field services organization. It's critical to get the staffing right. Unfortunately, what our benchmarks have shown is that understaffing or overstaffing is pervasive in this industry. Most service desks, desktop support organizations, and field service organizations are simply not staffed properly. And it's a relatively easy problem to fix. What I'm showing on this chart are the 2 most important, what we call the foundation metrics for service and support. One is cost per ticket or cost per contact. We're showing that on the x-axis. On the y-axis, we're showing quality as measured by customer satisfaction. So we've created 4 quadrants on this chart, each represented by there's a vertical bisector representing the average cost per contact for the data point shown. There's a horizontal bisector showing the average customer satisfaction for the data point shown. The quadrants created help you understand whether or not you are low cost, high quality, low cost, low quality, high cost, high quality, or high cost, low quality. Ideally, where you want to be on this chart is in the upper right-hand quadrant. This is where your costs are low, ideally bottom quartile compared to an external peer group, a benchmarking peer group, and your quality is high. Again, top quartile relative to an external peer group. The only way to get into that upper right-hand quadrant of low cost, high quality is to be right-sized. If you are understaffed, there's a pretty good chance that the quality of service you offer is going to be below average. So you may have low costs, but you're also going to have low quality if you are chronically understaffed. That would be the lower right-hand quadrant where the red diamond is, the understaffed diamond is. Now, if you're overstaffed, that would be the yellow diamond in the upper left-hand quadrant. You might be able to deliver high quality service, but it's going to come at a very high price. So both of these have their drawbacks. Being high priced, high quality is probably not a good position to be in, that upper left-hand quadrant. Likewise, being low cost, low quality is probably not a good position to be in. So what you're trying to do is strike an appropriate balance between cost and quality. That's what gets you into the upper right-hand quadrant where you are both efficient, meaning low cost, and effective, meaning high quality. Right sizing, that is having the proper staff, not just your agent or technician staff, but also your team leads, your workforce schedulers, your QA, QC, your trainers, etc. Having the proper staff is critical to getting into that upper right-hand quadrant where you can deliver a high quality service at a reasonable cost. So this is our 30,000 foot view of why right sizing is so critically important. This brings us to our first polling question. We actually have two polling questions consecutively here. The question is this: do you feel that your current headcount is adequate to support the workload you're being asked to manage? So we've got 5 possible answers. Always, meaning you always feel that you have adequate staffing. Most of the time, sometimes, never, or don't know might apply if you're not affiliated with a service desk or a desktop support organization. So I'll give you a few seconds to answer this poll. Do you feel that your current headcount is adequate to support the workload you're being asked to manage? If you'd weigh in on that, that'll give us some interesting insights into how this particular webcast group is feeling, and we'll true that up against what we see in the industry in the benchmarks that we do. That brings us to our second polling question. How would you describe your current support organization? Understaffed, right-sized, or overstaffed, or don't know. So 4 possible responses here. What we see in the industry is that most of our clients believe that they are understaffed. It doesn't necessarily mean they are understaffed. Sometimes they believe they're understaffed, but our benchmark shows that no, you're actually either properly staffed or you are overstaffed. That does sometimes happen. Do you believe you're right-sized? Do you believe you're overstaffed? We don't find too many in this industry that believe they are overstaffed, but occasionally our benchmarks do show that a service desk or a desktop support organization or a field service organization is in fact overstaffed. Again, thank you for weighing in on this particular polling question. Again, it gives us insight into what the audience of this webcast is thinking and feeling when it comes to staffing. And it also gets at a chronic problem that we've seen in this industry over many decades, which is that IT service and support tends to be viewed as a cost center, meaning a cost of doing business, but not something that adds to the competitive advantage of the organization. And as a result, when you're viewed as a cost center, there will always be downward pressure on cost, which for a labor-intensive function like service and support means that there will always be downward pressure on headcount. And that's why we find that there are so many service and support organizations that feel that they are understaffed, and in many cases are in fact understaffed when we run the numbers and back into the proper headcount that they should have. Now, I want to address the elephant in the room, which is the pandemic, which kind of turned the industry upside down a couple of years ago. And the industry is still recovering from the pandemic in the sense that a new normal has yet to be found in this industry, a new normal around staffing and scheduling and the balance of at-home workers versus in-office workers. How do you do training? How do you do desktop support and field services when most of your customers are remote? So what we're hearing anecdotally from our clients is that the ticket volumes have gone up and they've stayed up post-pandemic. The resolution times have gotten longer. Both first contact and first level resolution rates have gone down. Absenteeism is up, job satisfaction is down, processes aren't being improved, customer satisfaction is down, and service and support is struggling with inadequate headcount. I did a variation on this presentation not too long ago as a keynote presentation. And one of the things that I added to this chart was headcount or extra headcount did not come to the rescue. For those of you who experienced this firsthand, you know how painful it was to see your ticket volumes go up, but not be able to increase your headcount to match the increased workload. So what is the reality of the situation? Well, here's what the data tells us. Ticket volumes are up 35% from pre-pandemic levels. First contact resolution rate is down from 78.2% to 71.5%. FLR, first level resolution rate, is also down. Cost per ticket has gone up. Why? Because the handle time has gone up from an average of 7.6 minutes to almost 10 minutes. MTTR, this would be for field service or desktop support tickets, those have increased from 6 hours to almost 10 hours. So the mean time to resolve, that's different from the work time, different from the handle time. It's basically ticket close time minus ticket open time. It represents the duration that the ticket was open, not the work time for the ticket. The ticket backlog, this would apply for desktop support and field services. It was about 7.2 days of average volume. That was average ticket backlog pre-pandemic. Now the number is about 12 days. Absenteeism went from about 6% per day, or on any typical day. Technician or agent absenteeism was about 6%. It's now over 11%. Job satisfaction dropped from 77% to 67%. And customer satisfaction dropped from 84% to 75%. So the anecdotal data that I showed on the previous page turns out to be largely accurate when we look at how ticket volumes have gone up, how FCR and first level resolution rate have gone down, how costs have gone up, how mean time to resolve has increased. The fact is, virtually every metric since the pandemic has moved in the wrong direction. Let's address the first one, ticket volume. Why is that number up? It's because there's so many more work from home employees and they require more support due to connectivity issues, things like ISP and VPN. There's also no buddy support. If you're not working alongside others who might be able to help you with a quick solution, you don't have that buddy network anymore. There is no local desktop support. I should say that reduced desktop support. And one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that a lot of shift left happened as a result of the pandemic, meaning tickets were moved from desktop or field services to level 1 support or self-help, self-service. But a lot of the desktop support and a lot of the field services went away during the pandemic, and it hasn't really come back. Organizations have just figured out how to provide resolutions remotely, or they've offered walk-up kiosks, or they've offered drive-through service centers where you can bring your device and swap it out at the drive-through center, for example. User training as a result has been scaled back, and problems simply aren't resolved as quickly as they once were. That's why the mean times to resolve are up. So we do in fact see that volumes have increased. They've come down a little bit in 2022, but we're still quite a bit higher than we were pre-pandemic. And again, to emphasize an important point, in a labor-intensive industry like this, when volumes go up, when workload goes up, you need additional resources to manage that workload, but headcount has not come riding to the rescue. Most support organizations have not been able to staff up when it comes to their agents, their technicians, their team leads, supervisors, and so on. So let me show you a couple of examples. One from an overstaffed service desk. For a benchmark that we conducted, this particular service desk had 20 analysts, they had 3 supervisors, they had a workforce scheduler, a trainer, a QA/QC person, a manager, for a total of 27. We did a benchmark and we used our headcount calculator, which I will demonstrate a little bit later in today's webcast. And we found they really only needed 15 or 16 analysts. They probably needed 2 supers, and then 0.5 schedulers, 0.3 trainers, QA/QC, and managers. So normally you would combine the trainer, QA/QC, and manager role into a single person, perhaps even combine the workforce scheduler role into that single person. But the reality is they only needed about 19. So this was a service desk that was overstaffed. It doesn't happen that often, but it does happen in about 10 or 15% of the cases that we benchmark. So it's not unheard of. But the more common case is understaffing. And here's an example of understaffing in a desktop support environment. And by the way, this particular service desk with 27 that really only needed 19 is probably, what I would consider to be a mid-sized service desk. It's not a large service desk, and it's also not a small service desk. For desktop support, this would be considered on the small end of the scale in terms of total headcount of 11. That was their current headcount, and they were pretty substantially understaffed. Once again, we have a headcount calculator that we used as we conducted the benchmark to ascertain whether or not they were overstaffed or understaffed. They currently had 10 techs, a supervisor. They didn't have anybody doing dispatch, QA/QC, or management, so they had a total of 11. And they really needed about 17 and a half. And again, we show fractional headcounts in the right-hand column here to indicate that even though you don't need a full-time dispatcher between dispatching and QA/QC, there's probably a full-time responsibility there. Also, you might combine, have one of your supervisors also operating as the manager of this desktop support group, so that you can kind of round up that supervisor team lead number, add the 0.28 managers to that, and end up with 3 supervisors and team leads, one of whom would serve as the manager for that particular group. So understaffing is the more common scenario we see in this industry. And it happens, as I mentioned earlier, because oftentimes service and support is viewed as nothing more than a cost center. And when you're a labor-intensive cost center, there will always be downward pressure on headcount. And so that's what we see in this industry quite frequently. I want to bring up something that's fairly important. We call it the staffing fallacy. It's true of service desks, field service, desktop support, and contact center organizations. And the fallacy is this. I'll give you an example of a phone call I got just this week where somebody said, hey, it was actually an email. And there was a client of ours that sent us an email and said, we're about to engage in a new acquisition and we've got 2,500 new users coming on board. Based on that, those 2,500 new users, how many more staff do I need in the service desk and how many more staff do I need in desktop support? And it's really the wrong question because there is no one ratio of technicians to users when it comes to either service desk or desktop support or field services. So that magic ratio, for example, you need 1 agent for every 500 users in a service desk. You need 1 technician for every 250 users in desktop support. You need 1 technician for every 1,000 field service employees. Those kind of ratios simply are fallacious. They lead you astray because what matters is not the number of users you are supporting. What matters is the amount of work they generate. So we've changed the names here. There really is no Acme Corporation. There really is no Umbrella Corporation. But just to illustrate the difference here, both of them had 5,000 users. Acme was supporting 4,400 laptops. So was Umbrella Corporation. Desktops being supported were 1,900 at Acme and 1,100 at Umbrella Corporation. Printers, 200 at Acme, 320 at Umbrella. 4,650 smartphones at Acme, 2,600 smartphones at Umbrella, and there were 490 servers being supported by Acme and 220 servers being supported by Umbrella. Now, if we look further, we can look at the workload generated. At Acme Corporation, workload is measured by the work minutes per month, which is simply the number of tickets multiplied by the average work time per ticket. 57,600 minutes of work time per month at Acme Corporation. Umbrella Corporation had 33,800 work minutes per month. So it's fairly clear here, despite the fact that they had a different user or the same user count, 5,000 users, Umbrella Corporation was producing less work for the technicians than Acme Corporation was. So naturally, the service desk staffing for Acme is going to be higher than it would be for Umbrella Corporation because the 2 organizations produce different workloads. Acme needed 13 analysts. Umbrella only needed 8 analysts. The key takeaway here is this. You shouldn't size your service desk or your desktop support or your field service organization based on the number of users you're supporting. What you have to look at is the amount of work they generate. And the amount of work they generate was shown on the prior slide. It is equal to your contact volume or your ticket volume multiplied by your average handle time. That gives you workload. That's what matters. If you understand what the workload is on a monthly basis, you can back into an agent headcount and then the headcounts you need for your indirect personnel. These will be your team leads, your workforce schedulers, your QA, QC, your trainers, your managers, and so on. So don't fall into the trap of thinking that if you know your user headcount, there's some magical ratio that will tell you how many agents or staff or analysts or indirect staff you need. No, what you have to do is look at the workload produced by those users, and inevitably you find that different environments produce different workloads, even if they have the same number of users being supported. I want to talk about a critical metric here called agent utilization. In a labor-intensive environment, utilization is what drives your cost. Lower utilization means lower or higher costs. Higher utilization means higher costs. Utilization, or I should say personnel, that is your agents, your team leads, your workforce schedulers, all personnel make up about 2/3 of the total cost of a service desk or of a desktop support organization. So naturally, as utilization increases, you would expect your cost to go down. Conversely, as utilization decreases, you would expect your cost to go up. That's what the data on this particular chart is showing. Blue diamonds are data points. X-axis agent utilization drives Y-axis cost per contact or cost per ticket. The red line represents the linear regression going through that data. And again, the lower the utilization, the higher your cost will go. The higher the utilization, the lower your cost will go, because these are labor-intensive functions. Now, how do we define utilization? Well, it's equal to workload or work produced divided by work capacity. The work produced in the numerator on a monthly basis would just be your inbound contacts or tickets multiplied by the inbound handle time. And we add to that the outbound contacts or tickets multiplied by the outbound handle time. So the numerator on this ratio represents the workload. The denominator would be work capacity. And the work capacity of an organization is equal to the days worked multiplied by the typical shift length, usually 7.5 hours, multiplied by 60 minutes to get the units in the numerator and the denominator the same. So let me show you an example of this. Let's say we have a service desk handling 375 inbound contacts per month, placing 225 outbound contacts per month. Let's assume that the inbound handle time is 10 minutes and the outbound handle time is 5 minutes. If we run the math on that, we've got 375 inbound contacts multiplied by the 10-minute handle time. We add to that the 225 outbound contacts multiplied by the 5-minute handle time. That gives us our numerator. The denominator would be the 21.5 working days, typical working days per month, multiplied by 7.5 hours per workday, which is average for the industry, multiplied by 60 minutes. And so for this example, that gives us an agent utilization of 50.4%, a little more than 50%, which is about typical for the industry. It's actually a little bit high for the industry. Here is some industry data for service desk utilization. You can see the red dashed line that goes horizontally across this chart represents the average service desk agent utilization, 45.4%. The low number on this chart is 30%. That's the bar on the far right. The high number on this chart, the bar on the far left, is 63.3%. And you can see that there's a wide range of distribution here when it comes to agent utilization. High utilization drives lower cost. Lower utilization drives higher cost. Keep in mind that when we calculate utilization, as I did here on the prior page, we don't back out vacation days, sick days, PTO. We don't back out administrative time, training time, idle time. We want to calculate utilization the same for every service desk and every desktop support organization worldwide. That way, everyone in our database is calculated the same way. Shrinkage is simply 1 minus the utilization. So a lot of organizations use the term shrinkage. It's really just the complement, 1 minus agent utilization. That will give you your shrinkage number. But the reason we don't back any of these other ancillary activities out, like training, administration, team huddles, PTO, sick days, or anything like that, is because those do impact your utilization. And we think you should know what your utilization is, including all of that time that doesn't go towards customer facing type activities. So we don't make adjustments for any of the so-called shrinkage, but we do know shrinkage is simply 1 minus the utilization. I'm going to shift gears here now, and we're going to take a look at METRICNET'S headcount calculators. I'm going to demonstrate those real quickly here. I'm going to do this by sharing my screen. So we're going to move away from the PowerPoint presentation momentarily. I'm going to share my screen. When I initially share it, when I initially share it, I get this multiple sort of windows effect here. And we're going to start with the service desk headcount calculator. And what we've done here is we've built logic and math into this calculator that makes it very easy to determine what your agent headcount should be, as well as what your indirect headcount should be. So I'm just going to make up some numbers. I'm going to assume that we get 10,000 tickets or contacts per month. I'm going to assume the handle time is 8 minutes. Not sure what happened there. And let's say that this is let's say that it is a 24/7 support operation. The reason that's important is because generally utilization in a 24/7 service desk is going to be lower than it would be in a non-24/7 service desk. So it usually runs about 5 to 10 percentage points lower in a 24/7 service desk, simply because the back shift from 10 at night until 6 in the morning and the weekend shifts are low utilization. And so we want to take that into account. Now, with these three simple inputs, what our headcount calculator tells us is that we need about 21 agents or analysts. We probably need 2.5 supervisors. We do need some workforce scheduling expertise, and we need about 0.4 trainers, QA/QC, and managers. Now, we put the fractional headcounts in here just so you know that there is some need for workforce scheduling. There is some need for training, QA/QC, and management. This might be combined into a single role, for example. But you can see how simple it is to go with some basic inputs on work volume, ticket volume, for example, handle time, hours of operation. And with that, we can come very, very close to giving you plus or minus 2 or 3%, telling you what the head count ought to be. Now, some of this will be influenced by your service levels. For example, if you have a workforce scheduling application and you put very aggressive service levels in there, the head counts might show up higher than those that we've shown here. By contrast, if you have very loose or very lax, if you will, service levels in your workforce scheduling calculator, the numbers might show up a little bit lower than this, but these represent industry averages that you might expect to see. Let's look at the same thing on the desktop support side. Let's say that we handle incident volume. Let's look at, let's just say 2,500 incidents per month in desktop support. Let's assume that we get 1,000 service requests per month. Let's further assume that the work time per incident is 20 minutes and the work time per service request is 60 minutes. Our technicians co-located with the users they support. This is important because it affects travel time per ticket. Let's just say that they are co-located. What's the average travel time per ticket? Let's just make up a number, 15 minutes. And let's see what this tells us in terms of what our head count should be. Okay, what this tells us is that we need about 28 technicians. We need 4 to 5 supervisors. We probably need a dispatch and assignment person, somebody who's monitoring all of the queues and allocating technicians where they are most needed at any particular point in time. We need a QA/QC person, and we need a half manager. And that manager might split their time, say, between the service desk and desktop support. So you can see how with just a few simple inputs on workload, your incident, your service request volume, your work time per incident, your work time per service request, whether or not you're co-located with your customers, meaning that there will be lower travel time per ticket, and then an estimate of your travel time per ticket. Put all that together and we can back into what the head count should be, technician head count as well as your indirect head count. It's pretty simple. It's pure math, along with some industry assumptions that we use around utilization based upon what we see from the benchmarks that we conduct. Now, I want to show you a quick way that you can back into headcount. And the example that I will use here will be the service desk. So let's first type out the utilization calculation. Utilization, whoops. Equal to your work output divided by work capacity. And if we put that into a formula, we can say that utilization is equal to ticket volume multiplied by ticket handle time, and we can divide that by agent headcount times 21.5 days in a typical work month. And by the way, I realize this is quite small. Let me blow it up a little bit. Okay, let me finish this off. 21.5 work days per month times 7.5 hours per workday on average times 60 minutes to get the units right in the numerator and denominator. So here's what we would have. The utilization is equal to your ticket volume times your ticket handle time. That's the work output. The work capacity is your agent headcount multiplied by the average 21.5 work days per month, multiplied by the 7.5 hours per workday, multiplied by the 60 minutes. Now, what we can do is algebraically manipulate this and move the agent headcount to the left-hand side. So I'm going to say agent headcount is equal to volume times handle time. And we divide that by, remember I moved things around. Now we put utilization in the denominator times 21.5 days per month times 7.5 hours per day times 60 minutes. If you want to back into an agent headcount, you can do it fairly easily using this formula. So let's substitute some values in here. Let's look at and let's assume that we have a monthly ticket volume of 7,500 tickets, and the average handle time is 12 minutes. And we're going to, actually I need to turn this into an equation. So let me put a plus sign out there, okay? So we have 7,500 tickets with a 12-minute handle time, and we're going to divide that by, let's assume a utilization of 45%. That was about the industry average, 0.45 times 21.5 days times 7.5 hours times 60 minutes. And I need to change this symbol over here. Okay, and I think this will get us to the agent headcount that we need. So our work output is 7,500 tickets times 12 minutes a ticket. In the new denominator, we have 45% utilization times 21.5 days times 7.5 hours per day times 60 minutes. What does that look like? It says you need about 21 agents. So a real simple calculation that you can use to back into an estimated headcount. Now, if you want to use a different assumption on utilization, if you think you can be more highly utilized, let's say 50%, I just put 0.5 in there, and that tells us we need 18.6 agents. And then you can look at the ratios over here and figure out, okay, based on the ratios here, supervisors and team leads to analysts, workforce schedulers, trainers, QA, QC, and so on, the same ratios are going to apply to these agent headcounts. So when you want to determine your indirect headcount, you can use those ratios that were shown over here on the first tab of the headcount calculator. But the main takeaway here is that there's a pretty easy way, a real simple calculation that allows you to back into an estimated agent headcount. And by the way, this works for desktop support and field services the same way that it works for the service desk. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop sharing this right now, and then I'm going to get back to our slide presentation and pull those up. And hopefully you're seeing my slides now. They're still coming up on my computer. Yeah, for some reason my slides are not coming back up. So Here we go. Okay, hopefully you're able to see that. Thanks, Angela, for verifying that you can see my slides. So what I've been through is a real quick illustration of why right sizing is important. If you're overstaffed, your costs will be too high. Your quality might be good. It probably will be good, but your costs will be too high. If you are understaffed, which is a more common problem, the red diamond that I'm showing on this particular chart, it's likely that your quality of service is not going to be good, or at the very least, you're probably going to have to cut back on some of the strategic activities that you would normally engage in. These would include things like problem, incident, and knowledge management. They might include things like training. They might include things like technology projects to build out, to determine whether or not you want to adopt an AI tool or a rules-based tool like Watson, for example. But what happens is these strategic activities oftentimes are the first things to get sacrificed when you're understaffed, and eventually you're simply understaffed and you can't manage the workload that you're being asked to manage, and that will have an impact on both the quality of your service as well as your service levels. So this is why right sizing is critically important. You need to thread the needle on cost and quality, and getting the head count right allows you to strike that balance between the cost of the service you deliver and the quality of the service you deliver. Ideally, you want to be in the upper right-hand quadrant here, where your costs are in the bottom quartile and your quality is in the top quartile. It is possible to achieve both of those objectives. So is right sizing important? Of course it is. Now you know why it's important. Okay. In a moment, I'm going to get to your questions, but we do have a final poll that I'm going to ask you to respond to. Let me get to that poll. This poll allows you to schedule a free consultation call with METRICNET. So for those that are interested in scheduling a call, it's obviously a no obligation, no cost call. We can talk about anything you'd like to talk about. It could be staffing, it could be service levels, it could be metrics, it could be the balanced scorecard. Whatever you want to talk about, this is your opportunity to schedule some time up to a half hour with METRICNET where we just have a chat with you and we answer any questions that you might have and potentially help you solve some of the difficult issues that you might be facing. Okay, on our website, you're going to find a number of educational resources for service and support. These would include our headcount calculators. I just illustrated those. We've got a couple of ebooks that you can download that define the key performance indicators for the service desk, as well as the most common key performance indicators for desktop support. You can also download a service desk performance targets calculator, as well as an ROI calculator. We also have a service desk and a desktop support balance scorecard template if you'd like to download any of those. Keep in mind that our webcasts are always free of charge. And if you like what you've heard today, I want to encourage you to go to our website to sign up for future webcasts. Next month's webcast is going to address the current state of AI, artificial intelligence, in IT service and support. You can download today's presentation and the associated attachments by clicking the attachments button. And once again, we'd ask you to rate our webcast and leave us any feedback that you would like to when you exit the webcast today. Okay, so that brings us to our questions. Let me go ahead and open this up. Looks like we got quite a few good questions here. Let's take a look at these. Okay, working from the top. The headcount calculator can work better for desktop versus service desk as it does not account for arrival of contacts. Staffing on gross levels does not equal scheduling needs. You're right. Let me address the second part of that first. Staffing at a gross level does not address scheduling needs. Absolutely, that's true. Scheduling and staffing are two different things, but they do go hand in hand. If you schedule efficiently, you will be staffing efficiently as well. Staffing efficiently doesn't necessarily mean you're scheduling efficiently, but if you schedule efficiently, you are going to be staffing efficiently. So yes, what we went through on the headcount calculators gives you gross staffing numbers, but then you have to go the next step. You have to schedule efficiently. Just because you have the gross staffing numbers doesn't mean you're scheduling efficiently. And so it is crucial, once you know what those headcount numbers are, to also have an effective scheduling mechanism so that you can deploy those resources effectively. And then the first part of the question was, the headcount calculator can work better for desktop versus service desk as it does not account for arrival of contacts. Yeah, the arrival of contacts, that's, the Erlang distribution, Erlang C distribution is what governs the arrival of contacts for both a service desk and for desktop support. That's where workforce scheduling comes in. It takes into account the queuing theory around the Erlang C distribution and make sure you have the right bodies in the right seats at the right place at the right time. So the headcount calculator doesn't necessarily work any better or worse for the service desk or desktop support. It is, as you point out, it gives you what the gross or optimal headcount should be, but then it's up to your organization to schedule efficiently to make sure, as I mentioned, that you have those right bodies in the right seats at the right place at the right time. Next question, for the headcount estimate, travel time, what percentage of tickets is the estimate assuming it would apply to? Well, travel time might be 0 on some tickets and it might be an hour on some tickets. And so you have to look at average travel time per ticket, just like you would look at average work time or average handle time per ticket. So when we look at travel time, we're looking at average travel time across a large number of tickets. So that's the important point there. Just like average handle time represents the average across a large number of tickets, and average work time per ticket in desktop support and field services, which is the equivalent of average handle time for the service desk, same thing applies. So you're looking at average travel time per ticket. Next question, is there any way you could share the calculator file? We do have some tools on our website that are available for download free of charge. The calculators are I'm not trying to sell anything here, just so you know. Our calculators are not free of charge, but they're very modestly priced. They're only $49. So if you are interested in getting the headcount calculator for either service desk or desktop support or the contact center, those are available for purchase. And again, not a sales pitch, but I'm just letting you know that we don't offer it free of charge, but the fee is fairly modest, we believe. Next question, what are the number of contacts for the service desk? I'm not sure what you mean by that. What as the number of contacts? Well, the number of contacts is simply the number of contacts that you have inbound at your service desk. It's typically larger than the number of tickets per service desk. So if you handle 5,000 tickets per month, there might be 7,500 contacts associated with those 5,000 tickets. Depending upon your organization, you may track contacts only, you may track tickets only, or you may track both contacts and tickets. But there is a difference between contacts and tickets. Generally, your contact volume will be higher than your ticket volume because a ticket represents an end-to-end case resolution of a customer incident or service request, whereas contacts represent the actual contacts, of which there could be multiple contacts per ticket. Are there any explanations for why an organization's leadership may believe themselves to be understaffed, although the data suggests that they are overstaffed or appropriately staffed? Leadership, let's see, why an organization's leadership may believe themselves to be understaffed. For those that work in service and support, it's a very common problem to believe that you're understaffed because this is not an easy job, and it's easy to believe that if you just get additional staff, the job will become easier. You'll be able to handle the workload more effectively. You'll be able to hit your performance targets more effectively, and so on. So when you talk about leadership, it depends on whether you're talking about sort of CIO, CTO level people. They almost never believe themselves to be understaffed. They generally believe that you're adequately staffed or overstaffed. But if you look at those that are in the direct line of fire, the agents, the supervisors, team leads, and so on, they almost always believe themselves to be understaffed. So it depends on what leadership level you're talking about within the organization. I think there's It's very common to believe if you're on the firing line as an agent, a supervisor, team lead, and so on, you believe that you are understaffed, but you can determine whether or not you're understaffed by using one of the headcount calculators and or using that simple calculation that I illustrated just about 10 minutes ago. Next question, how many companies represent the data? Depends on which slide you're talking about, but just count up the number of bars on the slide and that's how many companies are represented by the data. So when you see a distribution chart on things like utilization, each bar represents one service desk. Next question, I know our service desk is short-staffed and our customer satisfaction is suffering. How can I justify a request for additional headcount? Run a quick headcount calculation like the one I illustrated a few moments ago and see what it tells you about what your headcount ought to be, whether it's service desk or desktop support. You need to know your volume, you need to know your handle time, and you can use that to back into a headcount. And if it's significantly higher than what your current staffing is, that's a pretty good indication that you are in fact understaffed. Next question, if we are unable to add more FTEs, what would you recommend we do to better manage workload with our current human resources? There's a couple things you can do. One is engage in problem management to get to root causes of incidents. And if you can eliminate those root causes, or at least some of them, you can reduce your workload, your ticket volume. You can also shift left and try and drive customers into the self-help, self-service channel. And if they go into the self-help, self-service channel, they don't require agent assistance. So two things, one, ticket volume reduction through problem management. The second, drive volume into the self-help, self-service channel, and that will reduce the workload on your FTEs. And you can sort of right size yourself in a backhanded way by reducing the workload. Question, is there a silver lining for ITSM in the pandemic? Yeah, I actually alluded to it, which is that a lot of shift left happened, which is that field service tickets and desktop support tickets that used to be done in the field, a lot of that moved to level 1 support or self-help, self-service. So a lot of what used to be done desk side or device side or in the field is now being done remotely. And so a lot of shift left happened as a result of the pandemic. So I guess I could call that a silver lining, despite the fact that there was a lot of collateral damage associated with the pandemic, personal collateral damage around, illness and absenteeism and things like that, as well as the impact on IT service and support with higher handle times, higher volumes, lower customer satisfaction and the like. So if there was a silver lining, it's that many organizations adapted and they figured out how to shift a lot of their field service and desktop tickets left to either level 1 support or self-help, self-service. Going back to the bottom of the list here, is cost per contact just total salaries or divided by number of contacts? The answer is no. A fully loaded cost per contact will include all your personnel costs, that's salaries plus benefits, as well as your indirect costs, which would be your travel, your training, your office space, your office supplies, your telecommunications, your technology. Add up all your costs for your personnel as well as your indirect costs, and then divide that by the number of contacts. You can do that on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, or an annual basis. But that's what a fully loaded cost per contact would look like. Next question, would you include travel time as a factor in staffing? Absolutely, because if you have 10 minutes of travel time per ticket, that's significant. Multiply 10 minutes of travel time per ticket by 10,000 tickets per month, and you got 100,000 minutes of travel time. That adds significantly to your head count. So absolutely, you have to include travel time in the calculation for desktop support or field services when you're figuring out what your work capacity when you're figuring out what your work capacity is, and as well as what your workload is. Another question, I have different tiers of analysts. Would it make sense to increase the efficiency of Hey, apologies, everyone. It looks like I was momentarily disconnected, but I am back. And I was answering a question about the tiers of analysts. The question was, would it make sense to increase the efficiency of higher tiers, effectively breaking up the number of analysts between tiers? I'm not sure why you would want your higher tiers to be more efficient than your lower tiers. It seems to me that you want to maximize efficiency of both tiers. You don't want a lot of idle time in any tier. So I'm perhaps not understanding the question. I understand different tiers, tier one, tier two, but increase the efficiency of the higher tiers, effectively breaking up the number of analysts between tiers. Yeah, I don't understand why you would want to optimize or increase efficiency of one tier versus the others. You want to use all your analysts efficiently. And one implication being that you probably shouldn't hardwire the tiers, meaning if you've got an abundance of work at tier one and your tier two analysts are less occupied, you probably want to move some of your tier two analysts into tier one positions temporarily. So you need to have some flexibility between that barrier. If it's a permanent barrier between tier one and tier two, you're going to get uneven queues. You're going to create diseconomies of scale. So I would encourage you not to hardwire those. It's okay to have a tier two, but if all they do is tier two work, you are going to have a suboptimal situation where there are going to be times when the tier one analysts are overflowing with work and your tier two analysts have capacity that goes unused. So just put a flexible barrier between tier one and tier two, and the tier two analyst shouldn't have any problem operating at a tier one level when necessary. Okay, last question here. How do you suggest to incorporate SLA into this calculator? I have seen Erlang logic in some calculators. Is there an easy way to do this through the calculator I showed? Another question is the utilization benchmark, knowing the shrinkage and other entitled timeouts are not in the utilization calculator. What would be an ideal utilization range to continue? In terms of SLAs, I think the headcount calculator that I showed you gets you to within 5% plus or minus what the actual agent headcount should be. If you have aggressive service levels, you might up the headcount by 5 percentage points. If you have looser service levels, and these are very vague terms, I realize, but if you have looser service levels, I would decrease the headcount by maybe 5 percentage points. That's how you might incorporate your service level agreements into that calculator. Now, in terms of shrinkage and not backing that out of the utilization calculation, here's what I would be thinking is that if you have a 24/7 service desk, I would be thinking 40% utilization target. If you don't have a 24/7 service desk, I would be shooting for a 50% utilization target. For desktop support, I would be looking at 55% or 60% as the utilization assumption when you back into your headcount calculation or your agent headcount calculation. Okay. I think that was the last of our questions. I want to thank everyone for joining me for our webcast today on staffing ratios. I do hope you found it to be informative and insightful, and I hope to see you next month. Again, we'll be addressing the current state of artificial intelligence in IT service and support in our webcast in August. This concludes our webcast today. I hope to see you all on next month's webcast. Thank you, everyone. It was an honor and a pleasure to be your host today for Staffing Ratios and Rightsizing IT Service and Support.